Hi. So here we are again. We have begun part 3 of Treasure Island. And this is when it gets kind of especially interesting. Not that it hasn't been so far, but in Treasure Island so far, Jim Hawkins has kind of had to grow up fast. His father died, sadly. He met a crazy mean pirate staying at his house and then ended up with a treasure map, got hooked up with some folks who could take him on an adventure to find some treasure, and then found out just recently that the boat that he's on, the ship, the Hispaniola, actually has more pirates on it than the good guys that he's traveling with. And that's kind of a scary proposition. So now we are on part 3, and the title of the section, part 3, is My Shore Adventure. And of course, we can predict that from looking at the title, that he's going to go to the shore and have an adventure. And the first chapter of that is chapter 13, and it's called How I Began My Shore Adventure. And so I think that's what we're going to find out. So if you would, read along with me when I read, and make sure that your notes pages are nearby. And think about what you've already learned before and make some predictions in your mind. One of the cool things that you can do as an active reading strategy is have some already predetermined ideas of what might happen next. And you're probably going to be wrong. Most of the time you'll be wrong because you don't know the story yet. But if you make those predictions and as you're going along, things happen that don't match your predictions, your brain will connect to that. You'll notice those differences and you'll hang on to those and retain them longer. That helps us with our reading comprehension when we make predictions, especially the wrong ones. It's one of those crazy times when making a mistake actually helps you with learning. So please think about that. When we get to chapter 13, that's where we are right now. Think about what's going to happen on the shore. What kind of adventure might he have? How does he get there? What does he do? And now we're going to read it and see what happens. The appearance of the island when I came on deck next morning was altogether changed. Although the breeze had now utterly ceased, we had made a great deal of way during the night and were now lying becalmed about half a mile to the southeast of the low eastern coast. Gray-colored woods covered a large part of the surface. This even tint was indeed broken up by streaks of yellow sandbrake in the lower lands and by many tall trees of the pine family, outtopping the others, some singly, some in clumps. But the general coloring was uniform and sad. The hills ran up clear above the vegetation, spires of naked rock. All were strangely shaped, and the spyglass, which was by 300 or 400 feet the tallest on the island, was likewise the strangest in configuration, running up sheer from almost every side and then suddenly cut off at the top like a pedestal to put a statue on. The Hispaniola was rolling scuppers under the ocean swell. Scuppers are like these little devices on the ship that let water off the deck when it runs across it. So that means that maybe there was a lot of water coming on the deck and running across it and through the scuppers. The booms were tearing at the blocks. The rudder was banging to and fro, and the whole ship creaking, groaning, and jumping like a manufactory, which is an old word for factory. That's where factory comes from manufacturing. Okay. I had to cling tight to the backstay, and the world turned giddily before my eyes. For though I was a good enough sailor when there was way on, this standing still and being rolled about like a bottle was a thing I never learned to stand without a qualm or so, above all in the morning on an empty stomach. Perhaps it was this, perhaps it was the look of the island with its gray, melancholy woods, and wild stone spires, and the surf that we could both see and hear foaming and thundering on the steep beach. At least, although the sun shone bright and hot, and the shorebirds were fishing and crying all around us, and you would have thought anyone would have been glad to get to land after being so long at sea, my heart sank, as the saying is, into my boots, and from the first look onward, I hated the very thought of Treasure Island. A couple things happening here. Jim gets sick easily on a boat that's just kind of like rocking hard back and forth. When a boat is out clear into the ocean, it kind of moves with the big swells, and in a storm, it can be moved around pretty well. But when it gets closer to shore, there's a lot more action to it, especially if they're like trying not to go like with the push of with the current of the ocean. And so he's getting bounced around a little bit. He doesn't like it. Doesn't like the way the island looks. He's feeling a little bit like he dreads what's going to happen next. So he's not in a good mood. Okay. We had a dreary morning's work before us, for there was no sign of any wind, and the boats had to be got out and manned, and the ship warped 3 or 4 miles round the corner of the island and up the narrow passage to the haven behind Skeleton Island. I volunteered for one of the boats, where I had, of course, no business. The heat was sweltering, and the men grumbled fiercely over their work. Anderson was in command of my boat, and instead of keeping the crew in order, he grumbled as loud as the worst. "Well," he said with an oath, "it's not forever." I thought this was a very bad sign, for up to that day the men had gone briskly and willingly about their business, but the very sight of the island had relaxed the cords of discipline. All the way in, Long John stood by the steersman and conned the ship. He knew the passage like the palm of his hand, and though the man in the chains got everywhere more water than was down in the chart, John never hesitated once. Okay, that would make no sense. And honestly, I don't know a ton about how to navigate ships or anything like that, but I know that the man in the chains is the guy who's lowering this chain down to see how far down the where the bottom is, so the boat doesn't hit bottom and run ashore and wreck. Okay, so they're making sure. And so it says that the man in the chains got everywhere more water than was in the chart. So he's like, oh, no, I think we have plenty. But Long John actually knew where they were supposed to go instead. Long John knows this place really well. "There's a strong scour with the ebb," he said, "and in this here passage has been dug out, in a manner of speaking, with a spade." Okay, so what he's saying is like when the ebb tide, that's the tide that goes out away from the island, pulls a lot of the sand and stuff with it. And that's why the chart is different. It's not the same as it used to be, because it's been pulling the sand away from the island all these years since the map was made. We brought up just where the anchor was in the chart, about a third of a mile from each shore, the mainland on one side and Skeleton Island on the other. The bottom was clean sand. The plunge of our anchor sent up clouds of birds wheeling and crying over the woods, but in less than a minute they were down again, and all was once more silent. The place was entirely landlocked, buried in woods, the trees coming right down to high water mark, the shores mostly flat, and the hilltops standing round at a distance in a sort of amphitheater, one here, one there. 2 little rivers, or rather 2 swamps, emptied out into this pond, and, as you might call it, and the foliage around that part of the shore had a kind of poisonous brightness. From the ship we could see nothing of the house or stockade, for they were quite buried among trees, and if it had not been for the chart on the companion, we might have been the first that had ever anchored there since the island arose out of the seas. So in the actual textbook, it shows you the map, and so you might have remembered seeing that. But on the map, Jim he memorized it back when he first was like left with it. When the squire went to go get the boat, he was left looking at the map like, he had so many adventures in mind that he might have. And so he remembers seeing a stockade, which is kind of like a fort that has like a little house in it. He remembers the mountains, like the Spyglass, and the little Skeleton Island, which is the small island off to the edge of it. And now they're in the anchorage, which is between the smaller island and the larger island. So it's a calmer space. And he talks about the 2 rivers or streams that empty into it that are more like swamps, and that the foliage down there looks kind of poisonous and bad. It's a swampy, kind of nasty spot, actually. Okay, so that's where they are right now. There was not a breath of air moving, nor a sound but that of the surf booming half a mile away along the beaches and against the rocks outside. A peculiar stagnant smell hung over the anchorage, a smell of sodden leaves and rotting tree trunks. I observed the doctor sniffing and sniffing like someone tasting a bad egg. "I don't know about treasure," he said, "but I'll stake my wig there's fever here." If the conduct of the men had been alarming in the boat, it became truly threatening when they had come aboard. They lay about the deck growling together in talk. The slightest order was received with a black look and grudgingly and carelessly obeyed. Even the honest hands must have caught the infection, for there was not one man aboard to mend another. Mutiny, it was plain, hung over us like a thundercloud. And it was not only we of the cabin party who perceived the danger. Long John was hard at work, going from group to group, spending himself in good advice, and as for example, no man could have shown a better. He fairly outstripped himself in willingness and civility. He was all smiles to everyone. If an order were given, John would be on his crutch in an instant with the cheeriest "Aye, aye, sir" in the world. And when there was nothing else to do, he kept up one song after another as if to conceal the discontent of the rest. Of all the gloomy features of that gloomy afternoon, this obvious anxiety on the part of Long John appeared the worst. We held counsel in the cabin. "Sir," said the captain, "if I risk another order, the whole ship will come about our ears by the run. You see, sir, here it is. I get a rough answer, do I not? Well, if I speak back, Pikes will be going in 2 shakes. If I don't, Silver will see there's something under that, and the game's up. Now we've only one man to rely on." "And who is that?" asked the squire. "Silver, sir," returned the captain, "and he's as anxious as you and I to smother things up. This is a tiff. He'd soon talk him out of it if he had the chance. And what I propose to do is give him the chance. Let's allow the men an afternoon ashore. If they all go, why, we'll fight the ship. If none of them go, well, then we hold the cabin, and God defend the right. If some go, you mark my words, sir, Silver will bring them aboard again as mild as lambs." It was so decided. Loaded pistols were served out to all the sure men. Hunter, Joyce, and Redruth were taken into our confidence and received the news with less surprise and a better spirit than we had looked for. And then the captain went on deck and addressed the crew. "My lads," said he, "we've had a hot day and are all tired and out of sorts. A turn ashore will hurt nobody. The boats are still in the water. You can take the gigs, and as many as please may go ashore for the afternoon. I'll fire a gun half an hour before sundown." I believe the silly fellows must have thought they would break their shins over treasure as soon as they were landed, for they all came out of their sulks in a moment and gave a cheer that started the echo on a faraway hill and sent the birds once more flying and squalling round the anchorage. The captain was too bright to be in the way. He whipped out of sight in a moment, leaving Silver to arrange the party, and I fancy it was as well he did so. Had he been on deck, he could no longer so much as pretended not to understand the situation. It was as plain as day. Silver was the captain, and a mighty rebellious crew he had of it. The honest hands, and I was soon to see it proved that there were such on board, must have been very stupid fellows, or rather, I suppose, the truth was this, that all hands were disaffected by the example of the ringleaders, only some more, some less, and a few, being good fellows in the main, could neither be led nor driven any further. It is one thing to be idle and skulk, and quite another to take a ship and murder a number of innocent men. At last, however, the party was made up. 6 fellows were to stay on board, and the remaining 13, including Silver, began to embark. Then it was that there came into my head the first of the mad notions that contributed so much to save our lives. If 6 men were left by Silver, it was plain our party could not take and fight the ship. And since only 6 were left, it was equally plain that the cabin party had no present need of my assistance. It occurred to me at once to go ashore. In a jiffy, I had slipped over the side and curled up in the foresheets of the nearest boat, and almost at the same moment, she shoved off. No one took notice of me, only the bow oar saying, "Is that you, Jim? Keep your head down." But Silver from the other boat looked sharply over and called out to know if that were me. From that moment, I began to regret what I had done. The crews raced for the beach, but the boat I was in, having some start and being at once the lighter and better manned, shot far ahead of her consort, and the bow had struck among the shoreside trees, and I had caught a branch and swung myself out and plunged into the nearest thicket, while Silver and the rest were still 100 yards behind. "Jim, Jim," I heard him shouting, but you may suppose I paid no heed. Jumping, ducking, and breaking through, I ran straight before my nose till I could run no longer. All right, let's back it up just a smidge. They've approached the island, and with Long John's help, they've gotten in close where they can drop anchor. Okay, it's a place where the boat is going to stop anchored in a kind of a calm area between the large island and the small island. The large island is Treasure Island. The small island is Skeleton Island. Okay. And so at that spot, there's a calm sea. And in that space, though, it's been hot. It's kind of muggy. The air doesn't seem that good. It's a gray and ugly looking island. Everybody's kind of in a bad mood. Now, Jim, because he knows that they're, danger of pirates and doesn't have anything to do but get sick and hot on this boat. And the pirates, because they're ready to just make this happen, right? They're getting anxious. And Jim even says that maybe they thought they were just going to fall over the treasure when they got off the boat, so they get very excited when they get shore leave. And the captain is really, his point he's trying to make here is this, that they're going to give themselves away. If they don't act annoyed when the crew is misbehaving, then it's going to be suspicious. Like, what's up? Why aren't you punishing bad behaving crew members? And then Long John Silver would know that they knew that something was up. So the captain makes this good decision to send the crew, or most of the crew, off to shore. And Long John makes a decision to leave 6 back on the boat. Now, that's probably a good decision too. And Jim makes the decision, kind of out of nowhere, that look, there's not going to be a fight because there's too many guys left on the boat and they don't need me, so I guess I'll go to shore. And he jumps in a boat. And then he realizes, oh, dang, I'm kind of scared of Long John Silver, and he just notices I'm going. So he is in the first boat to land, and he takes off running. And that's where we end the chapter. And that's a really good spot to stop and think, well, what's going to happen next? What is going to happen next? There's a bunch of pirates on this island, and Jim. Okay. So, and I think the numbers were that there were 13 men and Jim going to the island, and there were 6 staying on board the ship along with, and we need to get used to kind of counting who's who. You've got the captain, you've got the squire, you've got the doctor, and you've got their men, Hunter and Joyce. Hunter and Joyce work for the squire. Okay. And Red Ruth. Okay. So there's three servants of the squire, plus the captain and the doctor and the squire. Okay. So there's 6 good guys that are Jim's friends. And then there's 6 people that are left behind by Long John Silver. So there are 12 people now on the boat, 13 on the shore, 14 if you count Jim. And the reason I emphasize this is because from here on out, you want to kind of keep counting like who's on what side. It matters. It's almost like a score sheet. If you can figure out who's who and who's a bad guy, who's a good guy, and are they winning, that's kind of important as we move along through these next chapters. Okay. Spoiler alert, I guess. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and end this video, and we'll pick up again. Don't forget to stop and do your notes though, please. You're going to summarize, as I've kind of explained to you what just happened. And you need to think about what was difficult about this. Some of the language about the parts of a ship might be like navigating a ship. Those are hard words and things that we don't use very often. Things I'm not familiar with. I didn't know what a scupper was. So what kind of things were difficult for you? And what do you wonder? What was going through Jim's head, or what's going to happen now that he's done this? Or what did Long John Silver think when he saw that Jim was going to shore? So think about what you wonder, think about what you enjoyed, think about things that make you think as you are reading it. Stop and take a moment with it. Write down 3 words at least that you need to find out the definitions for, and write about some of the characters and what they did in this chapter. Jim really should be one of those characters, and Long John should be one of those characters, and maybe the third one should be the captain. Could be Job Anderson though, because Job Anderson is mentioned pretty distinctly in this chapter too. So make a good choice and fill out your work, and I'll see you again at the next chapter.